I'm Rod Cookson, and welcome to the final session of day 2 of the OASPA conference. We're going to move on to a panel session about Subscribe to Open, which builds on the previous 2 panels about Open and the Global South and Open and the Humanities. And we're going to talk about a fast-growing open access business model, which enables both of those agendas to move forward significantly. We have 4 expert speakers. Vivian Berghahn from Berghahn Books is the MD of Berghahn Books in the US. Antonia Pop, who's the Vice President at the University of Toronto Press in Canada. Charlotte van Rooyen, who's the Director of Marketing and Communications at APC-free in France. And I'm Rod Cookson, as you can see there, from IWA Publishing. All 4 of these publishers have experimented and developed Subscribe to Open models. And what we're going to do is tell you about some of our experiences and come back to some of those issues raised in the earlier panels today. But before we get to that, I should explain what Subscribe to Open is, so everyone is familiar with what we are talking about. Subscribe to Open is a model for converting subscription journals to open access. It moves journals completely to open access, so it's an immediate mechanism for providing open access, and it sustains them as open access journals. It's funded by library subscriptions. There are no article processing charges for authors, so many of the equity questions raised around other open access models don't apply to Subscribe to Open. Articles published are free to read and remain open access in perpetuity. And it works equally well in humanities and social science areas and STEM research areas. We're all here, all 4 publishers, as part of the Subscribe to Open community of practice, which is a very rapidly growing membership organization, which takes in publishers, librarians, library consortia, funders, consultants, and various other open access community organizations. The point of the community of practice is to bring people together with a common interest, work out what the problems are that we want to solve on Subscribe to Open, and then have constructive, very practical and very output and action focused discussions about how do we move forward with Subscribe to Open. It's an extremely convivial and friendly and informed and welcoming group, and we welcome new members. So what are we actually going to talk about specifically? We have 4 talks, each of which will take between 10 and 15 minutes on different experiences that the 4 publishers here have had. We'll start off with Vivian Berghahn from Berghahn Books, talking about S2O in the social sciences as a mechanism for creating APC-free open access. I'm then going to talk about the experience of IWA Publishing, which is a science technology publisher working with open access and Subscribe to Open. Charlotte will talk about taking a major disciplinary journal and turning that title into a pure open access journal with Subscribe to Open. And then Antonia will talk about launching a new journal with a very wide remit, interdisciplinary focus, and using Subscribe to Open as the mechanism for doing that. So we're looking at S2O from various different perspectives, and hopefully we'll give you a sense of how it can work as a model, and what the opportunities are and what some of the doors it opens for subscription journal publishers are. We're very much here to tell you what we've done, but we equally very much value your feedback. We're interested to know what your own experiences are, what your perspectives on Subscribe to Open are, and the questions you have in your own open access journeys. So please, as we go through, do post questions, do post comments in the Q&A on Zoom. The button's there at the middle of the base. We've got an hour and a half for the session today. We'll spend roughly the next hour talking about the journeys we've been on with Subscribe to Open and where that's taken us to. We very much want to spend the half an hour that's left at the end going through questions, digging into some of the details and answering your questions and helping you understand what S2O is better, how it might work with your library if you're a librarian, how it might work for you as a publisher. And if you have your own first-hand experiences, please share those too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to Vivian, and hand over to you, Vivian. Do you have your slides there? Are you unmuted?
I'm here. I will share my slides. Here we go. Hopefully everybody can see me and the slides, more importantly than me, the slides. Great. So thank you, Rod. So I was last here at the 2020 conference where I presented on our Subscribe to Open pilot, which was just kicking off. So I'm delighted to be here 2 years later to talk about how it's going. And I'm especially happy to say that we are still going. So I'm really happy to share those experiences and then talk through any questions, and later on in the discussion, talk some more details. But just to give you sort of a rough overview of our journey. So just by way of background, we are an independent humanities and social sciences publisher. We were founded by my mother, who's an anthropologist by training. And then we're still family run and led by my brother and I, and my eldest brother, who joined, both of us joined about 20 years ago. But we are still a small firm. We have just over 25 staff across 2 offices as well as remotes. And therefore we have a very busy day every day with 125 new titles a year and 40 journals. But we're very much, as I said, focused on humanities and social sciences and have done so for many years. And above all, we just really value what has been a very sort of close and collaborative working ethos with our authors and the communities in which we publish. I would sort of characterize our open access program as evolving, but determined. So much of the open access publishing we've done so far has been largely supported through institutional funding. So BPCs has been about 1/3 of our program. But as we are now doing with journals, we are always very keen to find a non-BPC approach. And so with that, have worked closely with other intermediaries like Knowledge Unlatched in their select programs to find library-funded solutions for open access. And that also included last year, we launched the Berghahn Migration and Development Studies collection, which thanks to the support from 17 libraries, looks to publish 15 titles open access by next year. On the journals front, about half of our journals are open access, and it's a combination of Diamond and Subscribe to Open. And that then brings us to our Subscribe to Open initiative called Berghahn Open Anthro. As I mentioned, this launched in 2020, at first with 13 journals, and we had a 14th journal joining us this year. Thanks to the Subscribe to Open model, all 3 years have published their volumes, and in 2022 are still in the process of publishing their volumes as APC-free open access. There is a lot of detail we've always been sharing as part of the community of practice as well, sort of what we've learned, who's helping us get there, and how we've got there on our website. So there's all the information there. And essentially just to talk a little bit about the collection. So we took a collections approach because we really felt this was sort of the best way to really get the attention of some key libraries while making it sort of a doable collection for libraries to be able to work with. But key to this model has been the wider range of libraries who participate, even at the single title level, or they subscribe to a number of titles, but for them, maybe the collection isn't still quite right. But all of this combined has been vital for the success of the collection and of our pilots. And as you can see, sort of the average subscription rate for our journals, as is sort of typical of most social science humanities journals, is $245. And just to give you a sense of overall scale, the 1-year collection costs 3,000 euros, which, as we know, is the price of one STM APC. So I think, as has come up, and it's a common theme sort of around affordability and funding, I think when it comes to social sciences and humanities, this is a key area of conversation. I will say that, you know, we've been working very hard with a number of intermediaries. Libraria were really key for helping us get off the ground. And we recently published a blog post about our journey, sort of how and why we got to where we are. And we're happy to talk about that more in the conversation later. So we're now in our 3rd year, as I mentioned, and we did add a 14th journal to our collection. And we were thrilled for this journal to be a society journal when 90% of its members overwhelmingly voted to not only take control of their open access for their journal. This is the flagship journal of the European Association of Social Anthropologists, but to do so using the subscribe to open model, because they were so keen to find an equitable approach to open access, having under their previous publisher only been able to publish open access as green, as gold open access, also using read and publish deals. So in their first year, we have been able to publish the first volume as a Berghahn journal in full 100% open access. And there are a number of initiatives we also undertook as part of the transition to us. On the one hand, unbundling a journal from huge big deals is a challenge in its own right. But there are a number of areas that we worked on closely with the journal, focusing on editorial improvements. For instance, to reverse one of the consequences of APC-driven models, which is namely the proliferation and pressure to publish many more articles than editors can really handle. So this was something we worked very closely on doing as a first step. So previously, the journal did, of course, have a very strong circulation thanks to the big deals it was part of. But having said that, now as an APC-free open access journal, it does enjoy a wider global and more equitably distributed readership. Its authorship is also more equitably distributed. So on the left here, you will see how the journal used to look as a APC open access model. So in green, you'll see the regions where it was able to publish open access. And on the right, you'll see what happens to its authorship for open access as a subscribe to open journal. And overall, the authorship of the entire collection has, for us, been a great success. So overall, we've published over 700 research articles, APC-free open access, since 2020 and through to 2022 volumes that have just been published, with more still to come. But in addition, we've also published nearly 400 APC ineligible pieces that are vital to social science and humanities journals. So these are, of course, forum sections, review essays, book reviews, those elements that are really key to these issues and otherwise can't be published. So this has also helped diversify the authorship of all of these journals. They were all published under a CC BY license of the author's choosing. And many of them chose NCND, which has been our default. And I think there's a much bigger conversation to be had around license models, especially in the social sciences and humanities. But ultimately, we work very closely with our authors to helping them pick which model is right for them. Readership, of course, has also grown exponentially. As you can see here, it's up 122% from 2020, which itself was up from the previous year in 2019, when we were otherwise closed. So that means in total, we've increased readership by a good 5-fold. And in 2022, we are also well up on downloads and readership of the journal. This has also led to a much wider reach of the journal. So overall engagements are also significantly increased from 2019 to 2021. And we've been really delighted to see how this raises the profile, not only of the journals, but above all of the authors and the scholarship that they're producing. So the next steps. So we are in our 3rd year and we're looking ahead to our 2nd phase of this initiative. And I would say that we've been really pleased with the response from libraries, especially early on, given that this was such an unknown model and there were many, many kinks to work out, and there still are. We've been really pleased with the overall diversity of our libraries, not only in size, but in type. However, the base still remains overwhelmingly funded by US and sort of European research libraries, but that's generally been the profile of our subscription base anyway, journals and books alike. So of course, we would love to see this model not only grow, but also grow geographically and be adopted in other parts. There are then, of course, ongoing challenges, and this is where the community of practice has been really valuable for us to talk about some of the areas that we all struggle with. So one of them has, of course, been, originally, one of the challenges was explaining the model when no one knew what it was. I think a new challenge is when people think they understand what the model is and sort of trying to sort of sort of re-educate and sort of talk a little bit around the misnomers of the model. And there are misunderstandings, of course, and presumptions about the model, sustainability, and its function. So this is obviously an ongoing educational process. And I will say a lot of the times we're learning a lot from the questions and the mischaracterizations that we come across, because ultimately the onus is on us to explain them and to find the right answers. Author education is, of course, huge, as it is in open access more generally. But of course, with a conditional model, there is sort of the added complication of talking about as and when it becomes a full open access article, and therefore what license is also appropriate. So this is, of course, means a lot of direct conversations with authors, which we also see as a welcome move, I think, because it allows us to really celebrate what's important about publishing in general, which is the relational aspect with authors in what is otherwise, with open access, especially at the APC level, an increasingly transactional relationship. So I think we really value to offer these to really improve our relationship in that way. There is then, of course, the matter of funding and funders, and as this came up also with OTSP, one of the reasons we're using this model is because there isn't any funding for the social sciences and humanities, or not enough to support it. But the question is what happens when there is funding. And I think this is generally a huge loose end that we're very keen to continue to work with. Large funders have been very positive about the model and endorsed it. Yet the question is how to turn those endorsements into actual funding. Because I think, as with any model, having diverse ways to support the model is increasingly important for its stability. And as was noted yesterday, libraries are continuingly under pressure to do this, and that is a big issue. And of course, as a library-based model, these are areas we always think about. There's, of course, a matter of infrastructure, again, for OA in general, but I think as many of these publishers, as we're working with essentially transitioning paywall journals, we sort of straddle both spaces of paywall journals and usage and data along with open access. So I think often intermediaries don't quite know what to do with a subscribe to open journal. Is it open access? Is it free? Is it, is it paywalled? At what points are we considered open access? So these have been areas that we also are still working on. DOAJ have been really helpful in working through those questions with us. And then finally, of course, reporting. I think especially with a model like this that combines subscription funding along with open access resources, who are we talking to? Which librarian do we need to go to when we're not only presenting an offer, but then communicating when the offer has reached its threshold and can become open access? Is it the collections librarian? Is it the open access librarian? Is it the Scholl Comms librarian? Or is it a new role that's been created to combine them all? So, I think these are areas that within the library is also a challenge, and we also are seeing that as well. And then, of course, what to report. Usage, as is common for open access, but especially with a model like this, when it comes to renewal time, showing usage when it's not captured because it's not authenticated, really sort of, I think, under reports the kind of usage a library is seeing by its faculty. And then, of course, authorship reporting, which is a huge sort of read and publish approach to open access that has also made its way into this model. And currently is immensely manual, but we've been working very closely with OA Switchboard on some solutions. And of course, Counter is working hard on trying to evolve its OA reporting, and we very much welcome that. So I think finally, just, as I mentioned, we now enter our second phase. So next year, we look to extend the collection to 15 journals, and again, hope to be able to continue in a 3-year cycle. Come what may. I mean, I think as with all other publishers of all models, we face the headwinds of economic crises, currency fluctuations, inflation, the general implosion of higher education. So all of these obviously are extremely crippling for library budgets. But so far we've seen that what we've seen so far has been really heartening. I think it especially offers an important opportunity for libraries to decide how and what they want to spend where. And so far, from what we've seen, we do find that Subscribe to Open is really helping to offer a way to preserve publishing and bibliodiversity through this model. So we look forward to hopefully coming back in another 2 years and letting you know how it's going. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vivian. That was fascinating and fantastic to see a genuine open access transformation for a portfolio of anthropology journals working so effectively. So you're back to me again, and I'm going to talk about a portfolio of science, technology, engineering, mathematics journals, which is the list I lead, IWA Publishing. And I'm going to start by taking everyone back to the beginning of 2021, which seems both recent and strangely distant. The world was in quite a strange place and some quite curious things were going on in different places. While those events were happening, IWA Publishing was making the decision to flip 10 journals to open access on a subscribe to open model. We already had 5 journals which were open access on various different models. 2 of them with APCs, 2 of them young, pure born open access journals, and 1 with the diamond model. We had 10 journals left, and we went for an approach which made all of those journals open access at once using subscribe to open. The reason we were interested in open access and in reaching open access rapidly comes back to the organization we are. We are the wholly owned subsidiary of a not-for-profit charity and membership society, and the remit of the charity is to solve real-world problems around water, drinking water, sanitation, flooding, and climate change. And just to pull out a salient fact here, this is the most recent state of the field report from the various United Nations agencies that overlook the water area. And the key quote there is this one that's expanded. There are 2 billion people around the world who do not have safely managed drinking water services. They cannot switch a tap on and get clean water out at the tap. For these reasons, we've always been extremely keen to make sure our research is disseminated as widely as possible. And in the age of the internet and the age where open access is possible, we see no reasons why everyone cannot read the research that we publish. It does save lives when it's implemented. It does improve health outcomes and development outcomes for literally billions of people worldwide. The problems in many ways are disseminating information and making sure people have access to up-to-date research, and open access is a fantastic model for us in delivering that. So since we moved these 10 journals to subscribe to open at the start of 2021, we've published more than 2,800 articles. By the end of this year, that will be over 3,000. All of those articles are pure open access articles. They're CC BY. They will stay open access in perpetuity. Had we not done the S2O flip, we might have achieved perhaps 10 or 15% of that level. So, you know, we're not talking about changing the overall shape of research literature as it's published, but we are a small publisher who have a significant presence in an important field. And this is a large increase in the amount of open access through our S2O program. So what have the results been since we launched this? We're getting far enough in that we can start to see what the impacts are. And the first thing we looked at is usage. And what we found in the first year for the 10 journals that are subscribed to open is that the number of downloads worldwide has more than doubled, 109% increase. We've had more than 4 million downloads in 2021. You've got the year-to-date figure for 2022 there. It's on track to exceed 5 million downloads. So we really are going from periods of pretty good, but relatively low usage to much wider, much more representative readership of our journals worldwide. And just to underline that point, this is a heat map showing where readership of our journals came from in 2021. And just for ease of readability, I've put on the top 5 downloading nations for us. The US has long been the biggest source of readership for us and is number 1. Then it's China, then it's India, followed by Germany and the UK. And this is already starting to become quite a good map of the very, very active and very significant research nations in the field that we operate in. One thing I would say is that in 2022, year to date, the number 1 and the number 2 places have already swapped, and China is now the biggest source of downloads we have. What's more interesting for us as an association, though, is how the overall mix of readership we have has changed. In 2019, before we moved to Subscribe to Open, roughly 2/3 of our downloads came from Europe, Australasia, and North America. In the first year of Subscribe to Open, 2021, that dipped down to 50%, and it's kept falling ever since. We really are starting to reflect the global research community in water and the practitioner community in water, with the majority of our downloads coming from Asia and Africa and Latin America. And this trend is continuing as we go forward. Our journals are starting to become a much better map of the community and much better map of the members that we represent through IWA. I talked about how many articles we've published. We're also interested, as well as the bulk numbers of articles, in what attitudes are towards open access and Subscribe to Open, and whether it's been noticed in the community. And we ask all of our authors to complete an author survey. And you can see here how results changed for the open access question quarter by quarter from the beginning of 2017. Each author can put 5 answers in on this survey. And what we found typically for the first 4 years we were running the survey is that almost nobody ticked open access as a reason to publish with us. When we introduced Subscribe to Open, which is shown here by the orange line at the start of 2021, that changed out of all recognition, and more than 35% of respondents by the end of 2021 were ticking our open access policies as a reason that they had submitted their papers to our journals. And the difference becomes even starker when you rank the importance of answers to our authors. Whereas in 2019, open access policies were 14th of a list of 16 possible answers. By 2021, the end of 2021, they become the 3rd most important. So authors have noticed. There's a lot of talk about authors not being interested in open access and not being interested in policies around open access. Our author base have embraced open access and have responded very, very positively to the Subscribe to Open changes we've made. I talked about impact in terms of readership, which is something that we care about and we spend a lot of time thinking about. We also look at citations, and I know citations are a slightly more complex measure with quite justified criticisms of impact factor, in particular the way that impact factors are used, but we do find them as an interesting measure of impact and the reach that we have. And we were very pleased to see that our Subscribe to Open journals had 46% more citations in 2021, and our impact factors went up by 39%. You can see that change, which is quite dramatic, on this chart from Web of Science, with the orange line showing that surge in citations and the rapid increase. But as I say, we're not per se interested in impact factor, even though it is one of the major stimulants and attractors for authors in our field. We're much more interested in where we reach and where we engage. And what I've got here, just to try and visualize that for everyone, is a pie chart showing where the citations to our 10 now Subscribe to Open journals came from in 2020, citing 2019 papers. So this is the moment just before we made the flip. And you can see China is the biggest source of citations, then it's the US, then it's Iran and India and the UK. It's rather similar to the map of downloads, not exactly the same. And you have big nations dominating and perhaps some smaller global south countries, but fairly familiar candidates listed there. This is now the same pie chart for 2022 sites so far to 2021. And it is proportionate to the 2019 sites. We're on track to have 3 times as many citations of our journals over the year, which for us is important and it's very pleasing. What we're even more pleased about is that 63% of the sites are coming from the Global South, whereas 54% were coming from Global South on those 2019 articles. And the mix of countries has changed as well. China is still the biggest, then it's followed by India and Iran, and then the US. Countries like Turkey then begin to feature. We also have Brazil in the top 10. We have significant European research nations, the UK, and we have Spain. We have the US and we have Canada in North America. But really, this is all of the continents represented. And these are all countries where a great deal of research is done in our field. And what we take from this is that people now can see our research, they read our research, and in places where there is a great deal of activity on water research, where the problems of tomorrow are being addressed and being solved, our research is now being read and it's being cited. And I would point out, even though a country like the US, for instance, has fallen in the relative number of citations we're showing on this chart, you know, the pie charts are to scale here, and the number of sites to 2021 is significantly larger from the US, significantly larger from the UK and from Canada. It's just not grown as fast as the sites increase we've got from China and from India and Iran and some of those other countries. I'm going to finish just by looking generally at the Global South question and put up a slide which shows countries that cited us in 2022 after we moved to subscribe to Open, which didn't cite us in 2019. So these are all new countries where our research wasn't getting read and cited before. We had some readership, but very little engagement of any kind. And they're color-coded here just to show which continent they come from. And, you know, it's very pleasing to see that there are African countries there, there are Asian countries, there are a couple of European countries, you know, Fiji in Oceania, and you have Cuba in the Caribbean. So we really are broadening our reach out, our remit. We're engaging far more effectively with the global community. These countries alone represent 250 million people who weren't citing our work before. And we take this as a real strong vindication that what we have done to try and remove barriers to our literature, remove barriers to our journal, to make engagement much, much stronger, has worked, and it's already showing up in the citation literature. With that, I will stop and I will pass the baton to Charlotte. Are you there, Charlotte? Are you unmuted?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Please, over to you.
Just try and, oh, so where's my, I can't find my, I'm sorry. The share screen is not showing my,
I can stop sharing if that helps.
yes, maybe that would help. Just try. No, I've just got desktop 1 with a big exclamation mark in it. That's very odd. I might need to get somebody to.
Can you bring your slides to the foreground of your computer and then maybe go back to Zoom and try sharing?
Okay.
Sometimes with Zoom, they drop off the share screen menu.
Now I've just got icons that say desktop 1 whiteboard. Microsoft PowerPoint unknown. I guess I could try that and see what I get. Open system preferences, security and privacy to grant access. I do apologize, everybody.
I think I've got your slide, Charlotte, haven't I? Shall I?
Do you mind doing that, Rod? That might be the simplest thing. Well, otherwise I might be here for some time.
I just need to tee them up so they're in the right place so I get them as a share option. I now have many versions of these different slides, so
it's very bizarre.
okay. What was it doing? Right. Nope, that's not what you wanted, was it?
Thanks.
Is that better?
That's you just need to put it into. That's perfect. Thank you.
And shout when you want to go along.
I will do. Thank you. There's only one animation. Okay. So sorry about that, everybody. I'm Charlotte Van Rooyen and Director of Marketing and Communications at EDP Sciences, and I'm really delighted to be here to speak about our experiencing is moving a flagship journal to subscribe to Open, so our experience with astronomy and astrophysics. And just before I go on, I just want to say, if Rod's presentation didn't inspire people to want to move their journals to Open Access, I don't know what will. So anyway, next slide, please, Rod. Thank you. So just briefly, a little bit about EDP Sciences. We're based in Paris, France, and we were founded 100 years ago by an academic community of French learned societies, including Marie Curie, Paul Langevin, and Louis de Broglie. Today, we publish journals, conference proceedings, books, and magazines in a broad range of STEM disciplines. And our digital archives date back to 1872 and contain articles by world famous scientists and Nobel Prize winners, etc. 60% of our journals are published in partnership with learned societies, and we actively support the move for our content to be open access in the following years. We also undertake educational activities such as masterclasses in partnership with institutions to enable early career researchers to understand scholarly publishing better. Next slide, please. So just a bit of background to our S2O journey. As Rob was talking about, I didn't have my slides to show what was going on in 2020, but possibly better forgotten. As part of our strategy to transition our content to open access, we started working in partnership with the Société de Mathématiques Appliquées Industrielles, SIAM, and we ran an S2O pilot with the journal Mathematical Modelling of Natural Phenomena. That journal successfully transitioned to open access in that year. And so following that pilot in 2021, we transitioned the remaining portfolio of mathematics titles to S2O, and they all successfully flipped to open access and have continued to be in open access ever since then. Next slide, please. So to give a little bit of background into the open access in astronomy, there are 4 key journals publishing 35% of the refereed astronomy literature. And these are owned by learned societies, and all of these use the services of a publisher. The community of researchers really strongly influence publishing developments, and there is a real strong tradition of green open access in astronomy, so widespread use of using archive. The core journals are all digitized and all freely available back to volume 1. And the access to the core journal content is often made 1 year after publication, so a sort of short embargo period. Next slide, please. So Astronomy and Astrophysics is our flagship title. It is one of those 4 leading journals publishing peer-reviewed original research in astronomy and astrophysics. It's a strong community journal. It's governed by a board of directors made up of representatives of 27 member countries, mostly in Europe, who own the copyright of the journal through ESO, the European Space Observatory. We're particularly well known for the publication of important special issues such as Planck, Gaia, and Rosetta, the sort of stories that sort of often make it to mainstream media. Next slide, please. So why did we choose Subscribe to Open for astronomy and astrophysics? As with SMI, we worked in strong partnership with the ANA board of directors, and with both of us with a full commitment to full open access for the journal. However, EDP and the board strongly believe that open access through a gold route was not acceptable in the astronomy community. And in addition, our experience with Subscribe to Open with our maths journals also had a lot to play. Next slide, please. So to understand the complexities of moving the flagship title to open access, I'm going to try and explain a little bit about the ANA financial model. So prior to moving to subscribe to open, the journal was a hybrid journal and revenue came from several sources. Revenue that was collected by EDP Sciences included the library subscriptions, revenue from transformative agreements. Those in particular are the French national deal and also Max Planck, and also APCs. As it was hybrid, there were certain articles that were paid with an APC to make open access. These pay for publishing costs, so the submission system, publication platform, production, typesetting, copy editing, marketing, etc. Then there are revenues collected by ANA themselves, which the publisher has nothing to do with. So that's the contribution. So those 27 member countries all pay a contribution to the running of ANA. Page charges for authors who are not ANA members. And these paid for editorial costs. So the running of the editorial office, things like language editing and educational initiatives such as the scientific writing for young astronomers schools that we run. Just a very quick word on page charges. So ANA historically have always strived to keep their subscription rate prices as low as possible. And to support that, ANA has always charged moderate page charges to authors from the non-member countries to help to cover their editorial costs. There are no charges to authors from ANA member countries who publish in ANA, as these member countries are already contributing to the running of the journal. So we did extensive financial modelling, obviously, before deciding which path of open access. And as I said, we all agreed that a gold open access APC driven wouldn't be acceptable within the community. But if we'd done away completely with the page charges, then it would have meant the subscription price for ANA would have had to rise to a level which would have been unacceptable in the library communities. So we've kept the status quo, really. And I just want to obviously reiterate that an APC is an open access fee, which allows papers to be immediately open access on publication. And a page charge is a fee to support editorial costs, for example, the language editing editorial office, that kind of thing. So in a post, so next, this is the animation, or Rods, if you could do 1, 2, 3 clicks. And then a fourth. So what we have here is in the S2O publishing model, we have simply everything, the status quo stays, except there are no APCs paid into EDP. I just want to put one final thing here about the pricing, is that the subscription price for ANA is about €3,500. One of the competitor price, one of the other 4 competitors, the subscription price is €11,500. And the one journal that is open access through Gold, the open access fee per article is between $2,500 to $4,500 per paper. So you can see how sort of complex the whole picture is, and actually the pricing is actually very, very reasonable. Next slide, please. So how the cycle worked is that we made the decision to publish Subscribe to Open in 2021. We had probably 2 years of discussion and modelling that went on before that. And then when the decision was made, where we went into kind of like a big campaign for the subscription renewal campaign for 2022. And then we continued to evaluate subscription renewals until we reached the point where we had made the decision on whether to publish open access or to not publish an open access. Happy to say that we reached the thresholds that we had agreed. And from 4th of April 2022, all newly accepted articles were published in open access, and the articles for the first part of the year were published in free access. And as I said before, our archives are all in free access. So this decision will be made every year, and it will be dependent on our subscription renewals. Next slide, please. So of course, we need to look at how we evolve the model and how we evolve and how we should reward subscribers. So in March 2022, we did a survey to our subscribers asking them what subscriber benefits would make it more or less likely that they would continue to subscribe in 23. And not unsurprisingly, the discount on subscription price, which you can see third from the bottom, was the highest response, but also things like discounts on page charges and financial transparency also featured quite highly. So next slide, please, Rod. So in 2023, we are now going to provide these following subscriber benefits. There's going to be an early bird, so a price freeze for ANA S2O subscribers who renew before the end of the year. So we will keep the price fixed at 2022 rates, and there'll be no annual increase. We're also going to reserve content for subscribers only. So the forthcoming articles that are not put into an issue will be only for subscribers. So that's very much follows the annual reviews model. And we will be offering a page charge discount for authors of subscribing institutes who are not member countries. And in addition, we will be producing a transparency report, which I'm going to touch on in a minute. Next slide. I don't have wonderful graphs like Rod had, and no very, very strong additional usage story either. You can see there was quite a strong spike in usage as we open the content up. But in 2022, we had also had a drop, but that was actually across all our content on our website. So perhaps there's a little bit more investigation that we need to do about that. But it is tracking higher than last year. The bottom slide shows obviously an overall increase in usage. In 2020, we opened up our content because of the pandemic. So there is a sort of an anomaly there. We've only been fully open access for 5 months. So I think that I'd like to be back here next year or the year after to actually be able to talk a bit more about some of the results and perhaps look at sort of authors and citations and this kind of thing. But early analysis is encouraging, but not as dramatic as perhaps what Rod and Vivian have been talking about. Why is that? We believe it's because of the universal use of archive in maths and astrophysics, and also because historically we've always had a very short embargo period, so just 1 year post-publication prior to the transition to open access. Next slide, please, Rod. So just to finish off, we in 2021, the Subscribe to Open Community of Practice ran a survey to all of our contacts, our library contacts. And one of the questions was, what features would encourage your institution to participate in Subscribe to Open offers? And by far the highest response at 92.6% was transparency around pricing. So we've sort of nailed our colours to the mast, and we have for our mathematics titles, we've produced transparency reports which cover things like, the journals involved, and then also information about prices, renewals, revenues, and how the programme is governance. And we will also be doing this for astronomy and astrophysics. That's the end of my talk, and happy to take questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Rod.
Yeah, no. Antonia, over to you.
Thank you, Rod. And let me just start by saying it's quite humbling to be on the panel with the 3 speakers you just heard and the amazing work that they're all doing. Wonderful to be with you today. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. I'm Antonia Pop. I'm Vice President of the Journals Division at University of Toronto Press. And we too are embarking on a Subscribe to Open journey. A little bit about the University of Toronto Press. We've been around since 1901. We are a nonprofit organization, and we are a mission-driven organization with the mission of disseminating knowledge for the benefit of society. We work towards that in a couple of different ways. We publish journals, 47 journals, and about 2,000 articles per year. We publish about 200 new books per year, and the books include a combination of scholarly monographs, course material, and trade nonfiction. We operate a distribution center supporting about 120 publishers with warehouses in Toronto and in the US and New York State. And what is perhaps a little bit unique to University Press is we manage the University of Toronto campus bookstores. And we love that activity because in addition to engaging with scholars, libraries, publishers, booksellers in other parts of the organization, we also have the opportunity to engage with students. A little bit about the journals. I mentioned 47 titles. We cover quite a few disciplines. We publish in the humanities, areas like history, art, literature, film studies. We publish in the social sciences areas such as education, policy, economics, and we publish in the medical sciences areas such as hepatology and microbiology. Like my colleagues on this panel, we are very much interested in open access and in pathways to open access. And we have been striving to achieve open access across a number of journals for a number of years. We currently work with 3 different models for different titles. We do publish 2 journals with APCs, and the journals in that category are medical. The authors are fortunate to be very well supported, and we offer, of course, waivers. We especially love the Diamond journals. We publish a couple of Diamond journals. In addition to achieving free to read, Diamond also allows us to achieve free to publish, which is a critical goal for us. And that is what brought us to the Subscribe to Open community of practice and to the model. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. In 2020, we published a book called Solved: How the World's Great Cities Are Fixing the Climate Crisis. David Miller, the author, is an economist and a lawyer by training, and he served as mayor of Toronto in the 2000s. He is currently leading a research center within the C40, and I'll tell you a little bit about the C40 in just a second. And as part of his work with the C40, he's quite interested in this question of what can cities do at the city level, with the understanding that climate change is a global problem. It's a problem that affects us all, and cities have perhaps unique latitude in the ability to act. So what can cities do through economic plans and policies? The C40 is very much a global network with membership from about 100 of the world's largest cities. These cities account for about 25% of the global economy. And the network is very much driven towards action. Again, to answer that question, what can cities do? What can we do at the city level to work together in driving the climate agenda forward? And that question was the impetus of our newest journal, which aims to serve as a bridge between the scholarly community and the practitioner community. The Journal of City Climate Policy and Economy aims to achieve exactly that, aims to serve as a platform for high quality peer-reviewed research that can hopefully translate into real world action, into policies and economic plans that can help with job creation, can help with various initiatives. And the initiatives are likely to differ city by city and across the world. But the idea is to bring together the kind of research that might enable practitioners towards driving that agenda forward. In developing an access model for the journal, we felt quite powerfully that we wanted to achieve open. Right? It's probably self-explanatory as to why. This is a problem that affects us all, academics and non-academics, and we felt that the research should be available to be read by everyone who might have an interest. And at the same time, we felt equally powerfully that a model with APCs wouldn't be appropriate. The membership of the C40 is global. This is a global problem. Wildfires, rising temperatures, these are all global problems. And we would like for the journal to bring in the voices of research from the global north, and we would like for the journal to bring in the voices of research from the global south. As we all know, unfortunately, in some areas, there's just not sufficient access to research funding available. And we felt that an APC model, which can work well in some areas, would introduce a barrier to publish in this particular case. You heard a little bit about the subscribe to open model from my colleagues, so I won't go into a whole lot of depth here, other than to really just say it picks up the elements of the subscription model that are powerful. The cost is shared quite broadly, for one, and for two, there is an infrastructure available for it. And it marries that infrastructure with the goal of open that we all share. So there is an annual point when we reach a threshold of subscriptions at which point the volume year becomes open, helping achieve that critical goal. In terms of how we set the threshold for a new journal, this is really about cost neutrality and about allowing for the journal to be sustainable over time. As a nonprofit, that's really the mission, and that's what's driving us forward. In terms of some of the benefits of Subscribe to Open, you've heard quite a bit about benefits already. And I think from our perspective, the greatest benefit is the question of equity. How do we achieve equity in a model that can work across different disciplines, perhaps across different regions of the world, for authors with varying levels of experience, early career as well as senior career authorship. We are offering a few subscriber-only perks similar to Charlotte. We are offering the forthcoming articles as available to subscribing institutions only. And we also are including an open access publish guarantee for lead authors from a subscribing institution. And just to give you a sense of the pricing, it's a tiered pricing model with 4 tiers. We try to keep this very simple, and the tiers are really based on the research activity of the institution. On the high end, the annual subscription price is $715, and on the low end, it's $285. And I think Vivian alluded to the average cost of an APC earlier in her presentation. So we did receive quite a bit of feedback when putting together the pricing model from the library community, and the intent really is to bring in as much participation as we can. Where we are in our journey, we are currently working on the production of the first issue, which will launch in October. I recognize that October may be a bit of an odd month to launch a new journal, but there is a specific event that's happening in October, and we felt that it is a critical moment. The C40 Mayor Summit is scheduled for mid-October, and that will also be the timing of the inaugural issue. The inaugural issue will be open without any subscriptions or thresholds or anything of that nature, with the intent of demonstrating the research agenda and what the journal aims to accomplish. And I love the tagline, United in Action. I love that tagline. It's the C40 Mayor Summit tagline. I think if we could, maybe borrow it, I think it also applies in the Subscribe to Open model. It really is a model that brings together various stakeholders. And I think Rod talked about this when he mentioned the community of practice earlier. Beyond the climate journal, we are very interested in how the model may be applied to additional UTP journals. Of course, success will be of the essence, and like my colleagues on the panel, I too look forward to speaking to you a couple of years from now and telling you all about the amazing work that we will have achieved, and assuming that the model works as we think that it will, we will be looking towards 2024 and 2025, adding more of the 47 titles into that Subscribe to Open mix. And with that, I'll say thank you as well, and I'll pass it back to Rod.
Wonderful. Thanks, Antonia. Thanks everyone for fascinating presentations there. And we've all gone back to the same screen so you can see all of us. And I'm quite impressed that we've done exactly 1 hour, which is perfect timing. So congratulations everyone on doing that. Very, very impressive scheduling by all of you and time management there. So that leaves us with half an hour for questions. We already have a good number of questions in the Q&A. Please keep sending those in. I'm just going to share one last lot of slides just to pull together what we've seen and what we've talked about, and then we'll go on to those questions. So just summarizing everything we've talked about here, what are the virtues of Subscribe to Open? Why is it a good thing? The first point is really simple. It does make entire journals open access at once. It's not a open access in 15 annual increments, slow kind of steady measures. It really does move to open access completely at one time. Readership and authorship become truly global. That's not to be underestimated. That really is important, and that is the point of science. It really is meant to be global. It's inclusive, it's fair. Antonia just mentioned equity, and that really is important. There are no APCs, so those APC related issues don't apply. It uses existing sales and procurement channels. This really is very important. Subscribe to Open is based on the way that libraries are used to doing business. It uses the same channels that libraries use for subscription journals. It doesn't need everything about what libraries do and other information purchasers and information disseminators do to be reinvented. And it's cost neutral for libraries, revenue neutral for publishers. The point of S2O is it's a mechanism for moving from subscription to open access and then sustaining open access. The really short version of that is that Subscribe to Open is open, equitable, and sustainable. And I would strongly encourage any librarians who are in the audience and seeing this presentation to support Subscribe to Open journals. If you are curious to find out more, we mentioned the Subscribe to Open community of practice before. It's in the best possible way a very unusual community. It brings together all stakeholders in this particular conversation, equal voices given to librarians and to funders and to open access organizations and to publishers. It's a constructive place. It's a collaborative community, and it really is a group of people who want to come together and work out how to solve problems and move scholarly communication forward. If you're interested, if you're curious, please do go to this link, come along and join one of the meetings. I'm sure you'll find them interesting and hopefully very welcoming. So questions and answers, we welcome your questions. Please do keep sending them in. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing these slides and I'm going to turn to some of the questions we've had. And I can see, Charlotte, you've already answered some in the Q&A section. But the first one I was going to ask Vivian is the first question we got, which you flagged up. And just for everyone's benefit, the question from anonymous attendee is, what are the subscriber misunderstandings and misconceptions you encounter?
Sure, thanks, Rod. Thank you, everybody, also for these great questions. I think sort of on the one hand, it's the sort of the misnomer that somehow the content is free and doesn't need to be supported. I think that there was a question about free riders, and I think this has come up, at least in the community practice. We've also talked about this in the context of how some libraries and their procurement processes dictate how they might spend their subscription funds and sort of the language around the conditional model. So this is sort of a great example of how publishers are coming together and sort of discussing ways that we can more clearly communicate that this model is obviously not free and that libraries do need to continue to support it. And I think then on the other hand, the other common sort of misnomer is that it's not free. So that's also, I mentioned, coming from authors who can't quite get their head around that they don't need to pay for an APC. So I think there's also a lot of kind of communication around that. And so that they're not deterred, so that they don't see this as somehow an open access journal that must have APCs that they couldn't afford, and so they wouldn't want to contribute. So I think there are sort of a couple areas going on there where it's about sort of really determining language and really how this model works year on year, which I think was also a question that was raised about communicating to authors for future years.
Excellent. And I think just to add to what you've said there, I think we've had a similar experience that we went through a round of explanations of what this subscribe to open concept was with different libraries and different customers. And the first few times, I think we were explaining from scratch each occasion, but it does seem that awareness has built and understanding has built quite rapidly. The next question I'm going to pull out is from Courtney Crummett, who I think is from MIT, and just a very detailed question, Antonia, for you. What's the title of the climate change journal you're launching?
Thanks, Courtney. Journal of City Climate Policy and Economy.
Okay, maybe you could type that into the chat as well, so everyone can see it. Put a link in. Yeah. And Charlotte, you have helpfully answered some questions. Would you care to talk about page charges? So again, this is Courtney has asked a question about the page charges and how that factors into the cost of subscription. But is that something you can talk about the future there? How do you expect that to evolve?
Yes, I mean, we know that it's potentially confusing, but we made the decision that it was trying to be clear in communications was preferable to increasing the subscription price at this point to something which would be probably untenable. So yes, we are definitely reassessing it. We, as I say, we're now offering a discount on page charges for subscribing institutes, and we'll continue to assess that as we go forward. But in order for the journal to run, we have these different channels of revenue, which we have to look at very, very closely.
Great. Thanks, Charlotte. And I'm going to answer a question by Anne van den Magdenburg. And thank you, Anne. The question there is, have we seen the same trend in publishing that we've seen in readership? So essentially, have the articles we published followed the readership that was on the maps that I showed before? Very, very broadly, yes, Anne, would be the answer. It's a little bit hard to separate out the different factors here. We were, like many STEM publishers, getting many more papers from Asia through the past decade, and that's continued. We're getting many more papers from Africa now, and we're publishing quite a lot more papers from Africa, and likewise from Latin America. So that trend has gone on. It's a little bit more complicated in some of our more traditional reader bases. In the Netherlands itself, we have seen an increase in authors with the subscribe to open policy, which is nice. And we have had read and publish agreements with institutions in the Netherlands since 2019, which didn't have that effect. So that's been nice. We're pretty steady in terms of North America, and there are other European countries where the number of articles we publish has gone down. So broadly, the authorship is following a similar trend. We've got healthy numbers of submissions for our articles, for our journals, and it is following those developments, but there are some complicated trends in there. Now, there are some general questions that it might be worth picking out. Yeah, this is a general question, which is about APCs and APCs and the S2O model. So this is a kind of expectation question. So for everyone, with a classic APC-based business model, there's growth potential with publishing more articles. With an S2O model, revenue growth is limited to increasing subscribers, and usually subscription budgets are decreasing. How do you ensure growth with the S2O model? I don't know who might like to talk to that.
I can take one angle. I mean, obviously Antonia, who's obviously launching a new journal, that's part of her whole strategy. So part of it will be, it's really looking at usage and looking at where usage is coming from, and looking at who should be subscribing to your journal. If there are institutions, for a journal like Astronomy and Astrophysics, it's I suppose simpler, because actually we have a very core readership and very core institution base. But it would be looking at the data around who's coming and using the journal, and should those institutions be subscribing, and then you know, hopefully the knowledge is the model is understood at that point.
And I think it's just to add to that, I mean, I don't know that anyone can ensure anything, but we definitely, you know, keep striving. And I think one of the challenges that we've come across, and I think this has been a conversation across many channels, is just how do libraries who really want to support open access initiatives like this move also money within their budgets. So if they have funds that are allocated to open access, how can that be somehow moved over to what is ultimately a subscription model? So part of what made the model so attractive, especially for publishers of a certain size, which many of us share, we are sort of small to medium-sized publishers for whom, where we don't have access to the resources and complicated new systems. So to be able to use the same systems was really crucial for helping us get the model off the ground. But ironically, that now becomes one of the challenges as well, now that there is an increasing shift to freeing up open access resources within the library. So how do those departments and those divisions within the library then determine how to move those funds over to then what is seen as a subscription product? So we sort of are neither one nor the other, and benefit from both, but then also sort of fall between stools in that respect. So I think that is an area where also in a way to sort of tackle obviously reduction in library subscription budgets, how do we then sort of benefit from the open access support that is out there? And then of course the funder piece that I also touched upon is also crucial in this. And I think ultimately anything that remains APC focused is a real challenge to a model like this. And all the Diamond open access sort of initiatives that are out there are not alone with this problem. And I think that's why funder mandates or statements like OTSP that we saw, while not necessarily impacting us because we don't really see much funding coming out of there anyway, I think anytime there continues to be a solution determined around APCs, that's a real issue because that continues to promote a model that is ultimately inequitable and out of reach for so many scholars.
Yeah. Great, thanks both of you. I think perhaps the point I would add to that is I don't think any of the publishers we have represented on the panel perhaps fit the classic APC-based business that's being described there. You know, we're not publishing simply to get as many articles as possible times an APC. That's not the goal of any of these four publishers. Speaking for IWA Publishing, you know, we're here to serve a community, and that's the point. We absolutely don't want to lose money publishing. You know, that's not our intention. But we want to be sustainable. We want to still be publishing in 20 years and 50 years. So that is a crucially important consideration for us. I think the point I would make is part of the journey we're having is learning some new skills. And I would give a shout out to Knowledge Unlatched and their OARBLE product that we've been using in the past 9 months or so, which is a mechanism for allowing us to see who heavy downloading non-subscribers are. You know, that's data we've never had access to before. We've known who our subscribers are, but not who the non-subscribers are. And now we have that information. We talk to those heavy downloading non-subscribers. We give them data about the articles we publish from their institution or their institutions. We give them usage data. Many of them just say, well, thanks, that's great. And that's the end of the conversation. At least one of those, almost as soon as we began the conversation, said, great, we'd like to support your Subscribe to Open program. We're advanced quite a long way with another institution in a similar situation. I think for us, it's about managing a base of supporters in a broad sense that enables us to keep publishing. That's our goal, and we're not in for profit maximizing by publishing as many APCs as possible. That's not what we're trying to do. What we are concerned about is economic sustainability, and I think S2O is working well on that basis.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that, Rod. It's I think that, you know, we've certainly had librarian come to us, and actually now they have the choice because of the equity side of it. We've had a subscriber that's not subscribed in the past to subscribe because we're a Subscribe to Open publisher. So that's been an experience we've had. Yeah. Right. Now
let me see. Okay, so I think all of us have had some questions similar to the question from Elizabeth Scarpelli before, and it's addressed UTP and others. So I guess, Antonia, if you have a first swing at this, and then perhaps we can all chip in if it's interesting. Do you continue soliciting subscribers after you hit the threshold? So there've been several questions here about thresholds people have set, and also to everyone, what percentages of subscribers do not continue year over year? I'm not sure if there's data to answer that, but Antonia, perhaps you can talk about, you have a threshold. What are you expecting to do if you exceed the threshold?
We would love to have that problem. So what we thought we might do is, we're working with a new journal and we are looking to grow the journal. So for 2023, we're expecting to publish 3 issues, 2024, 4 issues, and 2026, 27 and beyond, likely 6 issues a year. So the level of support will shift over the first few years. If the threshold is reached early, our deadline is March 31st, and we selected March 31st to sort of coincide with the end of the typical renewal cycle. If the threshold is reached, let's say in February, then we'll announce in February that the threshold has been reached. And if additional support comes through, we will invite the additional supporters to carry forward the subscription to the following year, to start building the subscription base for the following year early, with the assumption that we'll likely have a different level of publication output in the first few years. And if going further down the line in 2027, 2028 and beyond, once the journal is a bit more mature, I think what we likely would do is, again, look at the question of publication output, number of papers flowing through perhaps, and of course it has to be supported by submissions, which we expect that the submissions and the readership are always, working together in a spiral. I hope that helps.
Great. Charlotte, Vivian, anything you'd add on this question?
I think also, indeed, it's always a great problem to have. And I think then the question is, as with any journal, how to continue to grow and build the journal, add issues. But again, I think all of that needs to be done in moderation and with a view to what editors can handle, so that we don't compromise the quality of the article. And I think that's a whole other conversation, but there are other problems plaguing us, like, as with all journals, the peer review crisis and general sort of pressures on academics who support the publishing infrastructure. So I think, there are a lot of issues there that we work on. But then for us, it would allow us to then invest more in the infrastructure and the systems that are involved in order for us to have more information and to really more adequately support also the wider community through memberships and what have you, that we otherwise aren't able to do. So I think there are many ways that can go in to continue to grow and develop and build programs and return to it will allow us to return that back to the community.
Yeah, I entirely agree with that, Vivian. None of the publishers in the community are paying shareholders. We're all investing back into our publishing program. So it would be a great problem to have. I don't think it's going to be a massive problem at this stage. And certainly for a mature journal, we consider we probably have a fairly core audience, and our efforts are on maintaining that. One hopes that we might generate subscribers, but perhaps then other subscribers will drop off. So it'll probably be a balance. But certainly any excess made is not for shareholders. It's for feeding back into educational activities or making sure we have a good publication platform, this kind of thing. So
yeah. Okay. There is a question which is, how have you dealt with the free rider effect from an anonymous attendee? Institutions not supporting S2O as others will, and my researchers will still benefit. We have kind of touched on this question, but perhaps if I talk to this a little bit, I think what I would say here is we're trying to ensure we have a subscriber base that supports our journals, which is always the problem we've been trying to solve. And there always was in some sense, a free rider effect with the traditional subscription model, in that there would be some institutions where authors would submit and publish for free in subscription journals and not subscribe. That doesn't necessarily help their institution so much, but it's a mirror image of the free rider problem with subscribe to open. It's possible there will be institutions who don't support. I think certainly the perspective that IWA Publishing has, that I have, is that we simply want to build a subscriber base of people who want to support our journals and are invested in our journals and see the value of our journals. And our goal is going to be to keep doing that. There may be some friction at the margins, but that's not really our focus. Our focus is on keeping running successful and effective journals. With that question, I wonder if that might lead on to one of the other questions you answered, Charlotte, from Rachel Hackett, which was asking if you can comment on the compatibility of the S2O model and existing transformative agreements. And you mentioned you had some income from TAs, and I think there's a sort of overlap between those two questions.
Yes, we're a small publisher. We don't have millions of transformative agreements. We have two key ones, which are with the French national, a French national deal, and through Max Planck, which is specifically for astronomy and astrophysics. And both of them have been super supportive of S2O and continue to support us through, whether it's called a transformative agreement now, maybe not, maybe it has another term, but they continue to support a subscription to us. So I think maybe it's different for people who have lots and lots of transformative agreements, but I think I think when you're looking at kind of the demographic of these publishers doing S2O, I don't think it's a major thing.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Charlotte, we have 4 transformative agreements. We are in discussions with various library consortia and other representative groups about additional transformative agreements. I think if we look longer term, it seems entirely possible to me that subscribe to open evolves into transformative agreements of some sort. They converge on completely compatible agreements. The agreements we have at the moment, there is no conflict between subscribe to open and larger read and publish agreements. And I wonder if some of the discussion about free riders in 5 years or 10 years goes away, because the question becomes, librarians and consortium managers are still trying to make informed decisions about where should they invest the budget they have to get good research return from their university and from their faculty, and they'll spend those sums of money in ways that are sensible for them. I think all the publishers we have here and everyone that's in the subscribe to open community of practice shares that goal. And I think if there were mechanisms which were something like transformative agreements, but taken one step, maybe 2 steps further, which has some mechanisms for judging where value had been created and judging, what that value was, I think it might be easier to make some of these decisions. I think the thing that's clear, and the OSTP announcement recently has been the most stark underlining of this, is that the subscription model is in the process of ending. It won't end immediately, but we are moving to a different way of doing things. And all the publishers we have talking today have made very positive attempts to move towards that open access future. We don't have all of the answers at the moment, but I think a few years further down the line, there will be ways of dealing with all these issues which address some of these questions.
Can I just add something very quickly? I don't really like the term free rider, because actually a lot of the people who are accessing the journal are the very people that we want to be accessing, because they're not in a position to pay for it. So, it makes you feel like the community is dishonest, but actually often people accessing the journal are the very people in the global south, perhaps, who can't pay to have access to it, but they're who we're trying to serve. So I think it's perhaps you need to think of a different term, possibly, or a different way of looking at that.
Yeah. So a different kind of question now, which is also from anonymous attendee. Anonymous attendee has been quite active in posting questions to all the speakers. Can you talk a little bit more about how you communicated with your authors about the S2O model and how you managed the uncertainty, blah, 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 about whether articles would ultimately publish open access And what about authors who had to publish open access to meet funder mandates? So generally, author communication and the element of uncertainty about would a journal be open access. Would anyone like to take that question on?
I think maybe I could just jump in and say, I think this is where working again with sort of intermediaries, in this case with JISC, and on their agreements where we offered a sort of smaller collection, they were really helpful in helping us think through exactly this and quite, you know, determined about that of course we make sure that we have provisions for open access alternatives. So I think in this case, working with these agreements to find clauses that really do provide those assurances that if a journal isn't open access in a later year, the year that they're to publish, there are other alternatives such as green open access routes that are then funder compliant. So that I think has been a great example of the way that we're all sort of working together to evolve and think through the model and to try and come up with certainties for so much uncertainty. But I think ultimately it's been about working together and trying to find reasonable, realistic solutions in that respect. And then how to work with authors, I think many of them don't really understand it. I think things like ref in the UK will start to really impact, I think, author understanding. For us, it's also been about editor understanding and how to sort of talk to them about the journal as a conditional open access journal, and that our goal and our ultimate goal and ongoing goal is to remain open access. But should we ever together get to the point where we realize it isn't working, what do we do then? And again, the sort of conditional element of this model to really talk about the need for this to be continuously supported in order for the open access to be a further guarantee. And until that, it can't be guaranteed. So, you know, I think these are complicated conversations to have, but I think really important conversations to have between publisher and author and editor, which I think is ultimately a good thing as we sort of try to navigate the ever complicated open access landscape.
I agree with what Vivian commented on the funder mandates piece in particular. We view it very similar to the way we enable authors to participate in funding for every journal that UTP publishes. So we always comply with funder mandates through the green open access route anyway, and we will certainly do that for the S2O journal. I will just add that feedback from authors has been positive so far. In the licensing, we did introduce the conditional clause that if a certain threshold is reached, the article will be open, and the feedback so far has been positive. Still very early days, but so far I think the author community is supportive. Excellent.
Okay, right. We are almost out of time. There's I'm not sure what the answer to this is, but perhaps Charlotte, this is perhaps a question for you more than others. There's a question which is Amy Brand in yesterday's closing session referred to the downstream possibilities of open materials, increasing the visibility of publications. Can you comment on whether your communication strategies are shifting along with your open access models? It might be too early to say, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah, probably quite a little bit too early to say. Yeah, I mean, yes is a simple answer, but quite how, maybe you don't have quite enough time now to talk about.
I think perhaps the thing I would say here is, I think all of us are learning new skills. We understand how to publish subscription journals. There are definite communications functions that we didn't used to have that we are learning. That is work in progress. I think it might be the answer to that question is going to unfold in the years to come. I'm just going to pull out one factual question, another one from Anne van der Magdeburg in the Netherlands. For those of you who publish books, are you already implementing or planning to implement the S2O model for publishing OA books? Why brackets not question mark? We do publish books, IWA Publishing, 80% of them are open access. That's a mix again of Knowledge Unlatched helping us raise crowdfunded support for some of those, and we work directly with authors and some funders, which has come up in other places. People like the Gates Foundation have been very helpful to us with funding for books like that. I think, speaking for myself, we've got our hands pretty full with Subscribe to Open. You know, people like MIT with the Direct to Open, Michigan, some of the other publishers out there, some of the university presses, I think, are doing a really good job developing similar models for primarily books portfolios. And I think we're interested in watching those models, and it might be in a few years' time we go in a similar direction. We're just a little bit at capacity with Subscribe to Open at this point. Anyone else got anything on books, or should we draw this to a close?
I think maybe just to say in closing, absolutely. I think anything that's taking us away from PCs of any kind to really just expand who can publish and how they can publish, I think is really a positive development. And I think it's been great in the community practice to have also book publishers joining us with their collections. So, you know, I think that really needs to be the future. Anything that moves away from putting the burden on authors and institutions in that way. So we for sure are looking in that direction as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So with that, thank you, Vivian, thank you, Charlotte, thank you, Antonia. Three fantastic presentations, really informative, and it's nice, you know, as a publisher that's been doing S2O for 2 years, to still be learning many things from your presentations, which is good. And thank you everyone who's joined us on this panel. Thanks in particular for the questions, and sorry if we didn't get to your question in time. There were many questions, and more than we could answer in half an hour. I'm now going to very quickly change hats. I'm also a director of OASPA, so given we are the last session of the day, I'm going to take on an OASPA hat and say this is the final session on the second day of what is being a fascinating and very enlightening and very informative OASPA conference. So thank you everyone who has joined us today. Please come back tomorrow, which is the final day. The sessions start at 12 o'clock UK time. So that's 1 p.m. in Central Europe. That's the rather healthy time of 7 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. So please set your alarms now if you're in North America. And it's rather later in the day if you're further east. There is also the Slack channel, which you should have the link to. There is communication going on there. There's chat going on there. So please do opt into the Slack channel if you have questions or you want to connect. And recordings of today's sessions will be made available through the Slack channel as soon as is possible afterwards. So thank you very much. It's been great doing this presentation, very enjoyable talking to all of you. And I hope to see everyone again tomorrow and learn more about the wonderful and fascinating world that is open access. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.